पार्थाय प्रतिबोधितां भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीं भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् अम्ब त्वामनुसन्दधामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणीम् नमोऽस्तु ते व्यासविशालबुद्धे पुल्लारविन्दायतपत्रनेत्र येन त्वया भारततैलपूर्णः प्रज्वालितो ज्ञानमयप्रदीपः प्रपन्नपारिजाताय स्तोत्रवेत्रैकपाणये ज्ञानमुद्राय कृष्णाय गीतामृतदुहे नमः। सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोग्धा गोपालनन्दनः पार्थो वत्सः सुधीर्भोक्ता दुग्धं गीतामृतं महत् वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुं यं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्ररुद्रमरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः वेदैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदैः गायन्ति यं सामगाः ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनो यस्यान्तन्न विदुः सुरासुरगणाः देवाय तस्मै नमः।
Gurubhyo Namaha. We continue with the chapter 2 Sankhya Yoga, verse number 55. The essence of the commentary given by Maharshi Ji. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha Prajahati yada kaman सर्वान् पार्थमनोगतान् आत्मनि एव आत्मना तुष्टः स्थितप्रज्ञः तदा उच्यते. Here is the English translation. Bhagavan said, when a man completely casts off all desires that have gone deep into the mind, O Partha, when he is satisfied in the self through the self alone, then is he said to be of steady intellect. I repeat again. When a man completely casts off all desires that have gone deep into the mind, O Partha, when he is satisfied in the self through the self alone, then he is said to be of steady intellect. So here clearly we are seeing that a man is completely cast off all desires that have gone deep into the mind, and then he is also satisfied in the self through the self alone. Now let us review briefly the last verse where we left off, where Arjuna has said, "What are the signs of a man whose intellect is steady, who is absorbed in the self, O Keshava? How does the man of steady intellect speak? How does he sit? How does he walk?" And this question asked by Arjuna is answered by Bhagavan in the following 18 verses, which present the characteristics of realized men who have gained steady intellect, whether by renouncing action through the knowledge of Sankhya or by way of Karma Yoga. Now here I am just taking this one verse here because there is so much to be gained by the seeker from just this one verse. This verse brings to light the basis of the steady intellect, the realization of being in transcendental consciousness or in cosmic consciousness. Here Bhagavan addresses Arjuna as Partha, and this is to maintain the tide of love created by the use of the same word when he spoke to Arjuna for the first time on the battlefield. So here Bhagavan is giving this whole knowledge to Arjuna with great love. Bhagavan understands that Arjuna's mind is thinking more on a practical level, but he still wants the qualities of Arjuna's heart to remain at their height and not to be overshadowed by those of the mind. And this is why Bhagavan says Partha, so that tide of love, that was created, can be sustained. This verse clearly presents the steady intellect in the state of samadhi or transcendental consciousness, and also in the state of nitya samadhi or cosmic consciousness. So in both these cases, the mind gains that state in which it completely casts off all desires that have gone deep into the mind. When, through the practice of transcendental meditation, the mind gains transcendental consciousness, then it is completely out of the field of desires. This then is the steady intellect in the state of samadhi. Now we have the nitya samadhi, which is the cosmic consciousness. And here the mind is established in pure consciousness and is yet engaged in the field of action. It is in this state the mind has become transformed into bliss consciousness. Now the question is, how then is the steady intellect maintained in nitya samadhi? In cosmic consciousness, the being is permanently lived as separate from activity. Then a man realizes that his self is different from the mind, which is engaged with thoughts and desires. It is now his experience that the mind, which had been identified with desires, is mainly identified with the self. So again, it's important to understand this, that the man realizes that the self is different from the non-self, and the mind belongs to the non-self. But here the mind has risen to the level of the of bliss consciousness. So the mind, which has always been identifying itself with its desires, is now mainly identified with the self. So because of this self and the non-self being clearly cognized, then he experiences the desires of the mind as lying outside himself. So before, he used to experience himself as completely involved with the desires. Now he sees that the desires of the mind are lying outside himself. That means they belong to the non-self, and the mind is identifying with the self, which is the being. Here we might see that on the surface of the mind, the desires certainly continue. But deep within the mind, they no longer exist, for the depths of the mind are transformed into the nature of the self. So all the desires which are present in the mind have been thrown upward, as it were, and they have gone to the surface, and within the mind the finest intellect gains an unshakable, immovable status, which is called pragya. Pragya means intellect. And how is this pragya? This pragya is anchored to kutastha. Kutastha is the immovable, and this is the being. So the intellect is anchored to the immovable self, and this is the steady intellect in the state of Nitya Samadhi, the cosmic consciousness. So this is what is meant when Bhagavan says, when a man completely casts off all desires that have gone deep into the mind. So this is how one becomes free from desires and satisfied in the self. And again Bhagavan says, when he is satisfied in the self through the self alone, then is he said to be steady intellect. Now Bhagavan continues further. So the wavering intellect gains a very stable basis, and as a result the field of activity is managed with great efficiency. It is quite wrong to think that one who has gained this state remains slumped in inertia and does not engage in action. This state of life is such that it maintains the freedom of the inner being, keeping it uninvolved with activity, and at the same time deals with all actions most efficiently and successfully. So again, one is uninvolved with activity, but at the same time doing all the actions most efficiently and successfully. Because here what has changed is the mind. The mind has risen to the cosmic consciousness, and the mind identifies itself with the being and not with the desires or all of the activity that is going on in the non-self. Bhagavan uses the word when he says, when a man completely casts off all desires, and then again he says, when he is satisfied in the self through the self alone. So this word when is very important. It indicates that one is said to be of steady intellect only when one has gained transcendental consciousness, the state of separation from activity, or when one has gained cosmic consciousness, the state where one naturally maintains self-consciousness even together with consciousness of the waking, dreaming or sleeping states. And here in this cosmic consciousness, the self or being remains unshadowed by any experience whatsoever. So it is fully awake through the 24 hours, which is the waking, dreaming, or sleeping states. So normally there is this perception that only a recluse who has given up all worldly desires can attain the state of steady intellect. And so Bhagavan is saying it is wrong to conclude that only a recluse can attain the state of steady intellect. It can be gained by anyone through the practice of transcendental meditation. Further, the recluse way of life does not necessarily produce a condition where a man completely casts off all desires that have gone deep into the mind. Why? The state described by this phrase has nothing to do with any particular way of life. Here Bhagavan is clearly referring to a state, and this state is one where a man is free from desires and satisfied in the self. And this is easily attained by anyone who knows how to meditate and transcend relativity, whether he be the recluse or the householder, whether he meditates in a palace or a cave. Now let us see what Shankara, the great exponent of the philosophy, has said. Shankaracharya, the great exponent of the philosophy of integrated life, says in his commentary on this verse, by direct experience of the blissful nectar of the transcendent reality, the steady intellect holds itself absolutely without anything other than itself. So let me repeat again. By direct experience of the blissful nectar of the transcendent reality, the steady intellect holds itself absolutely without anything other than itself. And again, he defines the man of steady intellect in the following words. Shankara says, he whose intellect, born of realization of the distinction between the ultimate and non-ultimate, is settled, he is a man of steady intellect. So it is important to understand here where Shankara is saying that this steady intellect is born of realization. And what is this realization? Of the distinction between the ultimate and the non-ultimate. And so it cannot be gained by just the intellectual understanding and trying to intellectually analyze and discriminate between the ultimate and the non-ultimate aspects of life. So just the intellectual understanding gained by the analysis of and discrimination between the ultimate and the non-ultimate aspects of life does not produce the state of steady intellect. Why? Such practices, remaining as they do on the level of thinking, can at best create moods of the mind. They certainly will not produce the state of mind called steady intellect. This results only from direct experience of pure consciousness to such a degree of clarity that the difference between the ultimate and the non-ultimate is clearly cognized and appreciated on the intellectual level as well. Because this is one of the path of the absolute, where there is this continuous discrimination of the self and the non-self is studied, analyzed and contemplated. So even those who are practicing it have to have the experience of the samadhi, know the transcendental consciousness, and then grow into the cosmic consciousness in order to have the Nitya Samadhi. Again, Shankara plainly holds that this state of steady intellect is produced by the practice of transcending relativity as expressed in verse 45, and not by merely spinning words about it or merely trying to understand it. The process of experience is very different from that of intellectual discrimination of reality and non-reality. Let me bring back what Bhagavan said in verse 45. The Veda's concern is with the three gunas. Be without the three gunas, O Arjuna, freed from duality, ever firm in purity, independent of possessions, possessed of the self. Now, this should be sufficient to remove the misunderstanding created by commentators or translators of the Bhagavad Gita who hold that the steady intellect can only be gained by a recluse, a view which is responsible for the spiritual decadence in modern society. Unfortunately, Shankara's own view has been misrepresented by commentators who undertook to propagate his philosophy. They seem to have missed the central part of the spiritual life. And what is this central part of the spiritual life? Is to gain the transcendental consciousness and directly experience and have direct self-realization. As a result, everything which aimed at clarifying the process of transcending has been held to belong to the path of renunciation and attributed to the recluse way of life. This lack of insight into the principle casts the center of spiritual life onto the recluse order, and thus debarring the householder from the gains of spirituality and throwing the whole of humanity out of joint. Arjuna is asking for the outer signs of one who has this steady intellect. But this verse does not record any outer sign of the man whose intellect is steady and who is established in the self, because there cannot be any outer sign to show that a man is absorbed deep within himself. The inner state of such a man cannot be judged by outer signs. It cannot be said that he sits like this or like that, or closes his eyes in any particular manner. No such external signs can serve as criteria of this state. A man can sit in any style and go deep within himself and be in bliss consciousness. It may be said that when someone goes into samadhi, his face becomes serene and more glowing, but this is not something that can be gauged by any fixed standard. For this reason, Bhagavan does not enter into any such description. The signs recounted here are only subjective. They concern the inner condition of the mind as indicated by casts off all desires and is satisfied in the self. This verse brings to light the basis of the steady intellect, the realization of being in transcendental consciousness or in cosmic consciousness. And the next verse presents the nature of the man who has gained the study intellect. Verse 57 describes the nature of the means whereby he acts in the state of study intellect, non-attachment. Then verse 58 explains the nature of his activity. In this state, his senses are withdrawn from their objects. Finally, verse 59 points to the influence of the unseen on the study intellect. It is important to understand that not merely are the senses withdrawn from their objects, but even their taste for these objects vanishes when the Supreme unfolds itself to them in its unbounded grandeur. When the Supreme comes to be lived on the sensory level of existence. So the next 5 verses taken together reveal the essentials of the study intellect. Here ends the essence of this verse 55, chapter 2, Sankhya Yoga, Maharishi's commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. Now I will add a few words. It is not my desire to speak about myself or my experiences, but I think it is important to convey in a few words as to how I attained this Jivan Mukta or enlightenment when you are still in this body. As many of you know, I have been a householder. I have been married, had children, and had a very busy career being a physician. But a great desire right from childhood to be enlightened. My whole journey has been on a level of innocence because I really did not know what I was entering into and where I would land up. I was not even in the physical presence of Maharshi Ji, whom I chose him as Guru. But I believed in everything that he said, and I simply innocently practiced whatever he gave. My complete surrender to Maharshi came when I was writing on Ayurveda, because I wanted to bring out the knowledge the way he wanted it. And for that I had to surrender. I had to give up my own desires, my own likes and dislikes or ragadveshas, and just remain completely integrated to his desires and vision. Then everything changed. The continuing experience of the transcendental consciousness, the samadhi, established the cosmic consciousness within me in time. I can't remember exactly how long it took because I was also working very, very hard. But certainly it took a few years. It was then I realized that in order to be in this Nitya Samadhi and continue the progress, then I have to choose to be in a quieter environment and not be so much bombarded by the continuous needs and the activities. I had to pull back from the activity and be in a retreat-like environment. This is when I made the decision to come to Tirumala, and my family supported it. I never really thought that I was renouncing something or getting detached from something. So whatever has happened progressed in a very natural way. These are not experiences, these are living states. One exists in these states. Transcendental consciousness is not an experience, it is the self-realization. And the cosmic consciousness is a state where the self is lived through the 24 hours. You exist not losing the awareness. It is something beyond comprehension for one who has not experienced it, because one has the full cognition of the self, that you are the self, and all that within you and outside you is non-self. Within you, what I mean is your body, your senses. So this self and non-self, which are so separate, and you are living that, it is in that state you know that. And there is not a moment when it escapes your awareness. The self is witnessing the non-self, and you are that self witnessing the non-self of who you are, what you are, and what the world is. And this witnessing goes on from the gross to the subtlest. Even the blinking of the eyes, the breathing, the heartbeat, the subtle thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, all are seen and understood as non-self only. All of the happenings on the outside, with everything that is going on with people, with all of the creation, you see that as the non-self. I used to see this ever-changing, forever changing phenomena in such great detail. The non-permanency, that there is no eternity with anything, was cognized in great detail. The ephemeral nature of what is happening, of everything around, is known with great depth and detail. So naturally the dispassion arises, the vairagya arises, that this is not worth pursuing, this is not worth chasing, this is not worth being attached. So this was a natural phenomena. So if in this process some things are renounced, that which are not needed, even that was a very natural happening. This is not needed, so it can go. This is not needed, this is not needed. But it was not a renunciation on a forceful level. When one is in the self, when one is content being the self, naturally desires will not come up. Because all desires are only there when one is not contented, or one wants something more, or one is seeking something more. But when you say, I am fulfilled, I am happy to be the self, then how can the desires come? And the nature of the desires changes. They are not individual desires then. These become the cosmic desires. These are desire for the welfare of the world, welfare of others. Because I lived in a world and I tried to live with different kinds of people, circumstances, and situations. I always tried to be myself, and this is what I maintained even when I came to Tirumala and lived in the Himalayas. I remained myself. I never saw the need to imbibe any of the outward qualities or their presentations or their moods to be one of them. But they understood and they respected. Because I remained myself, I naturally became easily accepted with both the sadhus and sannyasis, the pandits, and also the householders. They could clearly see that I was established in the being, and my existence was in that cosmic state. Then later on, after 2 years in Tirumala, then the God consciousness got established, and I remained in that state for about 2 to 3 years before again the unity consciousness or the Brahmi Chetana was established. I can just share those in a simple way as we go along. But the important thing I want to convey here is that I have been a householder and I have been able to attain this. So this is possible for everyone. I stepped out as Vanaprastha and I realized that the complete completion is the state of sannyas, which is described in the 4 ashramas. The Brahmacharya, Gruhastha, Vanaprastha and the Sannyasa. So all of this is a natural sequence. So I speak this because I want to be able to give hope to everyone that everyone should aspire for enlightenment and be enlightened in this one life while you are still in this body. Let me share with you what Maharshi Ji said. When somebody was asking him a question, must one give up anything in order to gain this? And Maharshi Ji said, what is there to be given up? Only we turn in and then we come out. Nothing to be given up. You know, a man living in a small hut and is transferred to a palace. We don't count it to be the loss of the hut because it's a palace gained. It's no loss. The theory of renunciation and the theory of detachment is not for the people in the world. You know, if the bliss is omnipresent and if the kingdom of heaven is just within you, then that which is within you should be lived naturally, even when the eyes are enjoying the outer glories of the world. That which is within you should be lived naturally, even when the eyes are busily engaged, enjoying the outer glories of nature. Further, Maharshi Ji said, those who are saying, leave this and then you will get that, leave the joys of the world in order to gain the joy of the soul and all that, it is like saying you put out this light and unless you do so, how can you have the bright sunlight in the room? It is a bad logic because remaining in this light and by the aid of this very light, open the door and allow the bright sunlight to come in. To allow the bright sunlight, it is only necessary to open the door and not put off the light. And those who say that you should renounce the world think that the glory of the world is great, and unless this greater glory is put out, but how could the mind go towards the field of lesser glory? So, the one who advocates renouncing the world, they are supposing that the world is more glorified than the glory of God. And the glory of God is much less than the glory of the world. Therefore, the greater glory of the world must be shunned for the mind to accept the lesser glory of God. And this is a misconception. And the theory of detachment, just on an intellectual level, is also based on this, that the world is glorious and fascinating and it is enchanting to the mind, and unless you shut the doors of the world, how can you enjoy the divine? The field of the divine or being is like the bright sunlight outside, all pervading, whereas the field of the world is like the electric light inside the room. Further, Maharshi Ji has said, the things of the world need a long time for achievement because they are objects of the external world. And that which is farther from you needs also great attention. But for that which is within you, within only, you can go in and achieve it much more easily and enjoy it. So it is important for the householders to understand that nothing needs to be given up in the world, and there is no need for detachment of the senses. But when one gains the inner experience, then the outer glories will be further brightened, and then whatever happens will happen naturally. Further, a man becomes an ascetic because he feels that in the outside world there are greater attractions, and if he remains in those outer attractions, the inner glory will be lost. So turning to God, he renounces the world. One thing I want to say is Maharishi Ji has great respect for the sannyasa order and for the brahmacharis. He upholds the Shankaracharya tradition, and he extends his help to uphold this tradition and all the sannyasis and sadhus of this order. He values the brahmacharis, and he feels the society should support the brahmacharis who have made a clear decision to spend this life for attaining God. And finally, Maharshi Ji has also brought forth groups, individual groups for enlightenment for the women and the men, which are called the Mother Divine and the Purusha programs. And here they are the brahmacharis, and they are dedicated to this single purpose of being enlightened. Since the householders are a very large percentage of people in the world, that is why Maharshi Ji thought that everyone should be enlightened. And this connection to the self and this awareness, self-awareness should begin from childhood. And this art of transcendence can be learned by anyone, whether you are a householder or a recluse, whether you are a child or an adult, whether you belong to this culture or that culture or this faith or that faith. So I will stop here and we will continue tomorrow. Jai Gurudev, Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu.
गीताशास्त्रमिदं पुण्यं यः पठेत् प्रयतेत् शास्त्र